She didn't say a word when she left, her eyes fixed, her bag tight against her body and a security camera blinking in the corner of the room. Jasmine Crockett crossed the lobby as if she knew that scene would be remembered. Not for the screams, not for the humiliation, but for the silence. The manager, a man with a light speech and progressive rhetoric, had just asked her to leave. He said, "The moment called for discretion." Nobody understood. The day before, she had spoken in the House about the hidden budget of a state agency. 2 days prior, she had visited a private prison, leaving with more questions than answers. But there, in that boutique hotel with an ethical facade, she had simply been inconvenient. Her exit was cold, the gaze of the staff uncomfortable, and yet there was something in the way she held the key to the rental car, something calculated, as if all of this were part of a larger script yet to be revealed. The next morning at 8:42 a.m., a black, glossy Rolls-Royce, like a well-kept secret, parked in front of the same hotel. A driver got out, walked around the vehicle, and then opened the back door. Jasmine's husband stepped out, without sunglasses, holding a thick paper envelope. The receptionist swallowed hard, because that morning it wouldn't be Jasmine speaking. It would be the system that would listen, on its knees. Officially, Jasmine Crockett was expelled for behavior incompatible with the values of the institution. Unofficially, she had asked the wrong question, in the wrong place, about the right person. During a closed-door meeting with community leaders and executives from a liberal investment fund, she demanded transparency about a $1 million contract between the state government and a non-profit organization that ironically was headquartered in the very building of the hotel before moving. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content, and comment here where you're watching this video from. The manager, a self-declared advocate of racial equity, was quick to cut off the microphone. She insisted, "Why does this NGO receive public funding to represent black women, yet none of its directors live in majority black neighborhoods?" Silence. He smiled, deflected, and ended the event. The next morning, she wasn't just uninvited, she was physically escorted out. Cameras off, internal memos sent. The Congresswoman acted disruptively. That was the exact term. The tension, however, was not just in the act. It was in the pattern. Behind the scenes, Jasmine had been raising contracts, funds, agreements, and suspicious relationships between names in the party to which she herself belonged, and companies that hid under the mantle of social justice. The sheik left that signed columns in newspapers and spoke at conferences was, according to her, merely painting the same old elitism with rainbows. The arrival of the Rolls-Royce was not ostentation, it was symbolic provocation. Her husband, a former federal prosecutor, was bringing something more than emotional support: documents, records, correspondences, a mosaic of buried connections between that NGO, the investment fund, and contracts with the state government. The question now was not whether Jasmine was right, it was how much it would cost to admit she was never wrong. Jasmine Crockett doesn't enter an environment, she crosses it. When she first appeared in the state chamber, dressed in a dark blue suit and a pearl necklace inherited from her grandmother, the room fell into an involuntary silence. She didn't use a teleprompter. She didn't read notes. She spoke with a cadence reminiscent of courtrooms, but with the fury of someone who has been ignored by entire committees. A law school graduate from the university, where she was the only black woman in her class, Jasmine made a name for herself as a public defender before entering politics. In the hallways, they say she never lost a case due to omission and never spared an ally for convenience. While colleagues smiled at cameras, she looked directly into the eyes of the lobbyists. What disturbed her opponents the most, however, was not her tone of voice. It was her gaze, direct, unhesitating, as if she already knew the lies before they were even spoken. Journalists who interviewed her reported that, when facing Jasmine, they felt that every question was a chance to clear their own name or sink it, but her real power lies in what she doesn't say, in the millisecond pauses, in the silence before "so explain this to me," in the raised eyebrow when someone tries to bamboozle her with political jargon. She is the kind of presence that forces a CEO to justify their bonus. That makes a judge sit up straighter in their chair. That turns an entire auditorium into a jury, even if she is just listening. Jasmine doesn't fight for justice out of idealism. She does it for survival, and she is tired of surviving. The room was glass-walled, minimalist, with a view of the city's political center. In the center, a conference table that looked more decorative than functional. There, Jasmine Crockett sat across from Julian Maris, the Liberal manager who had expelled her 48 hours earlier. He wore a spotless white shirt, a light grey blazer, and carried a smile of someone who had practiced phrases in front of a mirror. "Congresswoman, I regret the misunderstanding. It was merely an excess of zeal for the event's protocol." She didn't respond immediately. She opened her leather folder, took out a printed sheet, and slid it slowly across the table. It was a bank statement, dated, signed with the name of the NGO that Maris had so vehemently defended, a direct transfer from a public account. "Zeal is interesting, Mr. Maris. Which program was this $320,000 allocated to?" He cleared his throat, the smile cracking. "These documents were obtained in a transparent manner," she cut in, "via FOIA. Nothing a citizen couldn't request, unless you're suggesting that citizens shouldn't know where public money is being used." Julian Maris crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair. "Congresswoman, there are contexts you may not understand. Social impact policy requires trust." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Trust is not given, Mr. Maris. It is audited." At that moment, his aide tried to interrupt with a paper in hand, but Jasmine raised her palm, without touching him, without saying anything. The gesture stopped the room. The tension was almost physical. Maris looked out the window as if seeking support on the horizon. He found none. Jasmine then stood up. "I'm giving you the chance to explain, but know this. The next meeting will be in public hearing, and I won't be asking questions. I will be making accusations." And she left, leaving only the echoes of her steps in the glass around her. On the third floor of the State Congress, Jasmine Crockett organized an impromptu press conference. There were no flags, no golden podium. There was a long table with numbered folders, a projector on, and behind her 3 citizens sitting in plastic chairs, a single mother, a retired teacher, and a former employee of the NGO under investigation. "Today, I bring no opinion, I bring documents." The lights went out. The first slide revealed a graph. Public transfers to the NGO Just Future over the past 5 years, an upward curve that exceeded $12 million. Then another graph showed the declared destination of the funds: courses, psychological support, training for vulnerable black youth. But the third slide dismantled the narrative. Images of the NGO's headquarters, empty, locked doors, no permanent staff. The journalist from National Tribune asked, "Congresswoman, are these transfers illegal?" "No, they are immoral, and from the moment malice is proven in the accounting, they are also criminal." Then came the first voice. Andrea Lima, a former administrative employee of the NGO, spoke with a choked voice. "They forced us to fill out false reports. They said it was industry standard. Those who questioned it were fired. I was one of them." The second woman, Mrs. Marinalva, a retiree and resident of a community promised as a pilot for social transformation, showed photos of an abandoned community center whose construction had been completed 2 years ago, according to public reports. It never even had electric light. Finally, the strongest voice, Taina, 17 years old, a public school student, a rejected scholarship applicant. "I applied 3 times to their program. They never responded. Then my name appeared in an institutional video as if I had participated." The silence in the room was absolute. Jasmine returned to the microphone. Now the numbers came fast. 147 contracts signed with state funds, 92% without bidding. 4 companies responsible for executing the services had the same hidden partner, a former advisor to Julian Maris himself. The records were there: signatures, dates, emails, a PowerPoint, impossible to refute. But what bothered those present the most was not the misappropriation of funds. It was the diversion of discourse. The NGO used words like empowerment, intersectionality, and historical reparation in every report, while in practice it stacked contracts and erased real faces. Poverty became a business model, and other people's misery a justification for electoral funds, concluded Jasmine. At the end, she handed a printed dossier to the public ministry. "The rest," she said, "is now with you." But everyone knew. The country had already listened. Julian Maris entered the public hearing wearing the same grey blazer, but this time he was visibly thinner. The deep bags under his eyes, the red eyes, and his less confident gait betrayed sleepless nights and legal advice that hadn't worked. When he sat in front of the commission, he faced Jasmine for less than 2 seconds. He lowered his eyes, took a deep breath. In front of him, the screens displayed excerpts from the presentation made days earlier. Data, names, voices. Tainar's face, frozen on the screen, stared back at him like a mirror reflecting everything that had been silenced. The commission president asked the protocol question, "Mr. Maris, do you confirm that you authorized transfers to the NGO Futuro Justo without proof of project execution?" He hesitated, touched the pen, scratched his forehead. The decisions were technical. The NGO had a history. Jasmine leaned into the microphone. History or connections? He blinked slowly. His right hand trembled. The audience at the back of the room was in absolute silence, as if something sacred was about to be broken. "Mr. Maris," she continued, "in 2019, during an event on social justice, you said, 'True leadership is measured by the courage to go against your own allies.' Do you still believe that?" The silence that followed was more devastating than any accusation. Maris looked around as if searching for a friendly face. There was none, just cameras, and history being recorded. He began, but his voice faltered. The judge allowed a pause. He accepted it gratefully, but as he stood up, he slightly stumbled over the chair leg. He held onto the edge of the table. A man who once carried speeches like armor now barely sustained his own body. When he left, Jasmine remained seated. She did not smile, she did not react. She simply observed. Because there, in that stumble, she knew the system had lost one of its soldiers. Days after the hearing, Jasmine called the press again, but this time the location was not Congress. It was the central square of the neighborhood where Marinalva lived. No podium, no banner, no slogan, just a microphone on a speaker box. The people around were real. The problems were too. She began with a direct statement. "It is not enough to bring down the scheme. We must seal the door through which it entered." She then presented the bill, the Participatory Transparency Law, a simple but disruptive device. All NGOs receiving public funds would be required to publish real-time spending reports with geolocation of the projects. Additionally, 30% of the fiscal council of these institutions should be composed of citizens chosen by lottery from the local community. If the money is public, oversight must also be public, and if the rhetoric is for the people need to have a voice in the contract. She cited the model from Bogotá, where popular commissions monitor bids for urban works. She mentioned an experience in Lisbon, where neighborhoods directly choose which projects will receive municipal resources. And she reminded that in the US, a city in California has already linked part of the education budget to the direct decision of mothers registered in the public system. It's not about radicalizing, it's about democratizing money. The project also included a free app where any citizen could consult in real time which organizations were receiving transfers, how much, and for what purpose. A reporting button would be incorporated and protected by legal anonymity. Some politicians laughed. Utopian, they said, but on that same day, the state public ministry signaled support for the proposal. 4 opposition deputies signed it as co-authors. And in less than 24 hours, more than 80,000 citizens had accessed the draft on the official website. Because when the proposal comes from someone who knows the ground they walk on, it's not ideology, it's urgency. In the last plenary session of the semester, Jasmine Crockett requested the floor. The clock read 5:12 p.m. Deputies were getting up to leave. Some were huffing, but she stood before the microphone with a folder in hand and a question in her eyes. "Today, I will read names. Just names." She opened the folder, took out a sheet. Evandro, 13 years old. They promised him a technology course. He's never had internet at home. Donna Yara, 74. She was expecting psychological support from an NGO that received $500,000. The office was an empty room. Marcos Vinicius, 22. He works delivering meals. He was used as a model beneficiary in a report he never read. She paused, breathed. These names won't make headlines, but they appear in forged reports, used to justify transfers of millions. The names of invisible people turned into an Excel line to feed beautiful speeches and sophisticated campaigns. She took a long pause. The silence was dense. And what if it were your child's name on that list, your mother's, your grandchild's? The Assembly TV camera caught a deputy trying to disguise his discomfort. Another looked at his phone, too afraid to lift his eyes. Jasmine continued. "The justice we cry out for inside here is often a fiction made for those who were already born into it. Out there, justice is a request that doesn't arrive, an unanswered email, an NGO with a closed door." She then lifted the last sheet. These signatures are from mothers who have never been heard. There are more than 400. They all ask for just one thing: oversight. She looked around. If this is too much for this parliament, then let this parliament confess it no longer represents anyone. And she concluded firmly, between protecting your allies and protecting those who have never been heard, I made my choice. May you all make yours. But no, the people are listening. The session then fell silent, and no one else left the room. The morning after the speech, social media was flooded with a hashtag, "My name on the list." People from different regions of the country began to report their experiences with false promises from NGOs contracted by the government. Teachers, mothers, young people, even former volunteers. Jasmine's speech crossed bubbles and burned bridges. National newspapers opened editorials praising her courage. One broadcaster aired her speech in full during prime time, and in the Federal Congress, a group of senators requested a hearing to nationalize the proposal of the Participatory Transparency Law. But the image that sealed the impact of the story did not come from Parliament. It came from the door of the boutique hotel where it all began. Someone placed a handmade sign there with shaky letters. Here, they expelled a woman who only wanted justice. Today, no one forgets her name. Tourists took photos. Staff pretended not to see. Days later, the Rolls-Royce appeared once again, not as a symbol of power, but of memory. It stopped in the same place. The driver got out, opened the door, but no one exited. Only an envelope was delivered to the reception. Inside, there was a single printed sheet. No signature. This time, I don't come to be received. I come to remind you that I have not been forgotten. If this message touched your heart, if you believe that justice only makes sense when it truly reaches the people, subscribe to the channel, share this message with those who need to wake up, and leave your comment.